Alrighty guys, we are back, and here to discuss the legendary, gaping, moist, stretched hole in Mother Earth, the Great Maw. As much as I enjoy talking about lore topics, nothing brings pure joy than discussing about gaping holes. So let's talk about the fattest, thickest of boys in the Warhammer world, the Ogres. And the Ogres that function with the Great Maw. All jokes aside, in this video we'll be discussing 3 overall things about the Great Maw in this video. First, its history, about how it came to be. Second, its significance in the ogre culture. And lastly, thirdly, how it has grown in the lore along with the implications. So first off, history. Like all good stories, we start in the unassuming rice farms of Cathay. Here is long before humanity discovered Sigmar. The dwarves are establishing their first cracks. The Great Wall, called the Great Bastion, is yet to be built. This is a primitive time where the lizardmen are badly beaten and displaced from surviving against chaos. The last bits of Chaos's forces are being snuffed out by the elves and dwarves collectively. Here, in Cathay, the Dragon Emperor and the Dragon Empress formed the great empire that we now know of today. A land where dragon mommies rule over their hot peasant daddies as they plant seeds in the rice farms. With such a prosperous beginning, there came danger from the high mountains. You see, the ogres at this time were not the massive ones that we know of currently. The ogres, while ever hungry, could actually be sated, and as such, dined on the peasants working the rice farms. Many stories filled the villages of children going missing and farmhands found with missing limbs. All the while, the ogres grew and swelled with numbers. What turned into minor occurrences started to plague the cities as farmers fled to the cities begging for aid as ogres started to eat the entire villages. This would not stand. The deprivation of peasant daddies to the dragon mommies would never be allowed, and the grand dragon daddy, the dragon emperor himself, was even presented with this issue. Here's where the lore starts to differ. On one account, the much older lore, the dragon emperor had his greatest and brightest astromancers channel a great ritual to summon a massive comet to destroy the ogres. The other account says the emperor himself, being a dragon who existed long before the old ones who created the lizardmen, wielded such power that he reached into the heavens and pulled out a comet the size of a mountain to personally kill the ogres. There is one more account. The ogres. The ogres believe that in their greed, their hunger, that they made a deity jealous. A great being who is a god of hunger became jealous of all their feasting and decided to punish their puny feast with a feast on their entire race. Whichever account you believe, I will leave it up to you. Personally, I enjoy the idea of a real god of feast existing who looked at the ogres and said to himself, "Oh, you think that is a feast? You think that morsel you're consuming is filling your gullet? Watch this," as he just comes crashing down to eat the entire ogre species. The ogre race was destroyed, not only losing their main settlement in the mountains, but the explosion itself caused such desolation to the environment that the ogres were left with no vegetation to eat. The ogres numbered in just a mere 100. Those that survived could not go to Cathay, as the path there required walking into the massive pit that just destroyed the species. But something new happened. Not only were the ogres wiped out, but now a really new sensation occurred. Now a nagging hunger stalked their psyche. Whereas before the ogres were hungry, they could easily sate it. Now, though, the ogres felt insatiable. No matter how much food they stuff in their gullet, they would always feel hungry, and worse yet, they always felt a palpable fear of their death from the echoing howls of the Great Maw. With a few ogres remaining, they decided to pay homage and try to appease the Great Pit that they dubbed the Great Maw. So with the history covered, we can now discuss how this affected the culture of the ogres. Now, this is where things get kind of unique, with the ogres being rather dumb, on a scale of smarter than greenskins but dumber than humans. There's a bit of animalism that occurs in their mind. Animalism is a belief of attributing human-like qualities to inanimate objects, typically children, because they do such imaginative thinking. Here, the Great Maw was attributed with many traits by the ogres: hateful, hungry, greedy. In their beliefs, the Great Maw will rise again to swallow the rest of the ogre species if they do not provide it sustenance, along with worship. As such, any hunts or raids by the ogre tribe, they would always portion off the best pieces and a portion of their food to make a stew for the Great Maw, or a sacrifice. Now, interestingly, after the Great Maw, the ogres have foregone the consumption of non-meat foods. With only a diet consisting of meat, the ogres hope to swallow the Great Maw themselves by growing their own girth, their own gullets, from the swallowing of non-ogre species. In their culture, this is reflected in their hierarchies, as many respectable ogres should have a gut that is larger than all the others, and a mouth that is all-encompassing. Now, here's an interesting question. What do ogre tribes do that are too far away from the Great Maw to make their tribute? Well, simple. The ogres will find a pit. Doesn't matter that it isn't the Great Maw. No, that doesn't matter at all. In fact, what does matter is the religious ritual of finding a massive pit, then declaring the tribute to the Great Maw. Slowly over time, if the tribe stays in the region and keeps donating to the same hole, it will over time grow into a real beacon of the Great Maw. I just find that interesting. I figured you guys should know that. Something interesting too is that when an ogre tribe declares a feast, the feast will be centered around a pit where they will be put down the tribe's maw stone. Now, a maw stone is a jagged rock that, when all the tribes put their stones around a pit, it forms that ogre symbol of a great jagged mouth. Inside the pit is where things get pretty interesting. The pit is where they hold championships and tournaments. So let's say you are Gurgle Guts Big Chewer, and you hate another ogre named Gulpin Gullet Sausage Sucker. Well, you can settle your feud in the pit, where you both fight for either a portion of each other's body, where the winner eats off a section of the person's body and belongings, or you fight to the death, where you claim all the belongings in the entire body. This is a great time for the ogre tribes, and indeed they revel in it, as the spoils of the collective tribes are shared. Another interesting culture development is that with the creation of the Great Maw, the ogres have gained something far stronger than anything they had previously. They gained access to magic, specifically gut magic. This magic has caused some interesting stirs in their culture, as now an ogre shaman can summon a gauntlet fist that can smash apart walls. Now they can regenerate their wounded bellies. Now they have access to the very winds of magic that previously they had no protection against. Such a development in ogre culture is not only interesting, but it makes the ogres realize that they are the favored children of the Maw, as the Maw has bestowed none its gifts except the fat, tubby ogres. Now, lastly, let us talk about the Great Maw and the implications. Now, something I find interesting is that in the older lore, the Great Maw was just that. It was a pit that the ogres claimed magical human-like qualities. Like any time an earthquake occurred, the ogres would be scared, thinking that the Great Maw was showing displeasure at them for hoarding food. Now, thanks to the growing of Games Workshop and the Warhammer brand, the Great Maw makes an appearance in the Total War game, where they depict it as a sentient sarlacc/tyrannid digestion pit. Personally, I'm at odds with that. At one hand, I like the idea of the ogres just being stupid, with their magical thinking attributing a hole in the ground as a real god. So, to show it as an actual monster seems to dampen that fantasy setting, to me. On the other hand, it being a magical being is sort of funny, because now we need to think, shit, what else did the ogres tell us that is actually true? Only downside is that now every single sentence being said is considered full-on canon, which really sucks for storytelling, as it is cool to see a story where a character just happens to be wrong/misinformed. That's totally okay. You can have characters like that, where a dwarf will say, oh, Gromril's actually the best material that's ever existed, and it turns out he's actually wrong. There might be something that's slightly better, but he just doesn't know that. That's okay. That's totally fine. It adds to the world building, because then you see their misconceptions, you see their beliefs deep down inside them. One good example would be the Greenskins. Greenskins literally operate on a belief system. So when they believe something really vehemently, it will manifest into a truth. But doesn't mean that they're right. Doesn't mean that they're correct. And that's something I find very displeasing. Now, something that is interesting to think about, ogres make a sacrifice pit to the pit over and over again. Indeed, some ogre tribes even make pilgrimages to the Great Maw itself to donate their sacrifices. Now, I find the story of the ogres rather inspiring. Here it is a monument to the day that they almost got utterly wiped out. And yet, they make this their center of worship. They see this pit, the very end of their species, and go, we will not only survive, but become greater through the hardness this pit represents. They took on a challenge that many would fall into despair and succumb to. The ogres could have easily just migrated to Cathay after the Great Maw was made, and simply moaned all the time in society, saying, we were peaceful in the mountains until the oppressors sent a nuke to us. We could have been great leaders if it wasn't for the massacre Cathay put on us. But they didn't. They instead took their belongings, raised their chins up high, and sought to make themselves better rather than sinking away to the easiness of being ruled by the dragons. It takes a certain amount of internal strength to see an easy path and to reject it. And for that, I admire the ogres, their sheer determination to stick to their own path, regardless if others offer them an easier road. Now, as it stands, we can see that the ogres are amazing in the lore because of their stubbornness. They own the trade routes. They themselves have come to rescue Cathay from chaos invasions. They are, in my book, great beacons of heroism. And when you look at it from this perspective and ignore the human gobbling and stupidity they suffer from, they truly do stand out as a very stalwart, stoic race. Can you imagine that? Let's say we'll take the United States of America as an example. Someone comes in and just wipe us out. We'll just say, for the sake of it, we'll say India. India decides to test a nuclear weapon on us and wipe out all America to where only 100,000 of us are remaining. And instead of joining Canada, joining Mexico, no, instead we just keep the states running. And we just keep on growing and re-prospering, dealing with all the nuclear fallout. And once we have reconstructed ourselves, we see that India is under attack by, let's say, Tibet. And we go to save India from Tibet. that takes a certain level of character. That takes a certain level of strength to be able to do that. To be able to look at someone who put you through the ringer and to say, you know what, they deserve better than this, and to come to their rescue. So, on that note, see you lads next time. Subscribe if you haven't. This is Freezer700 signing out. Peace.